Let's take our Bibles and let's get ready to turn in them. Last Sunday, we began a series of messages entitled and on Legacies of Leadership or Legacies of Faith. Last week, we considered Abraham and his legacy of faith. Abraham's willingness to trust and obey God even when the future was uncertain. And because he did that, it laid the foundation for a life of faithful leadership. The story of Abraham shows, as we discussed last Sunday, that faith requires action, trust, as well as a long-term vision that impacts future generations. Today we will look at and consider Moses, another great hero in God's redemptive story. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24 and verse 25 says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. You see, if Abraham's life teaches us to step out in faith, Moses' life teaches us to stand firm with courage. Say courage with me. Courage. Say it again, please. Courage. As you follow the life and story of Moses, excuse me, you will see that he faced overwhelming fear, as well as he faced overwhelming opposition. Yet Moses chose to follow God's call upon his life and lead the Israelites out of slavery there in Egypt. I personally believe that Moses' story is a powerful reminder that courage is not about having all the answers. Let me say that again. Courage is not about having all the answers, but it is about trusting the one who does. First, let's see how courage responds to God's call. Let's read Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. You would have too. So would I. Why the bush does not burn up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. God said, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. Let me pause right there as we read. Aren't you glad that God always sees what we're going through? I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Pezerites, Hivites, and Jebusites. A lot of yites there, isn't there? And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Oh, we're going to preach a message on that right there one day. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Ooh. And I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Wow. We see that Moses' journey begins in a moment of what I would describe as great awe and fear as well. Not just awe, but fear at the burning bush. God calls Moses to an extraordinary mission to confront Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. We see that Moses' immediate reaction is very human. He voices his fears and he voices his inadequacies, saying to the Lord, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" But God, he responds in such a way that it cuts right through Moses' doubts. And God says to him, "Moses, I will be with you." God cuts right through all of his doubts, all of his fears. And he says, "Moses, I will be with you." Here's what I want you to understand today. That very same assurance that God gave to Moses, Jesus gives to us when he said in Matthew 28 and verse 20, "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." See, the courage that Moses needed did not come from his own capabilities, but from his confidence in God's presence. And I'm here to remind you that when you feel overwhelmed by God's call, you are not alone. God has promised to never leave us nor forsake us. Author Sarah Young writes, and I quote, "Do not fear your weakness, for it is the stage on which God's power and God's glory perform most brilliantly." Did you get that? Do not fear your weaknesses, and we all have them. For your weaknesses, they are the stage on which God's power and God's glory perform most brilliantly. Please get this. Moses' story shows us that God doesn't require us to be extraordinary. He simply asks for our availability. So let me ask you, are there areas where God is calling you to step out of your comfort zone? Perhaps it's a call to full-time ministry, starting a difficult conversation, or taking a leap of faith in your personal life. And just like Moses, you feel very, very inadequate. Well, join the club. But God's calling is never about your ability. It's always about his ability. Not yours, but his. You see, courage begins with saying yes to God. Then trusting that God will provide the strength, and trusting that God will provide the resources, and trusting that God will provide the guidance that is needed. For courage is not the absence of fear, it's obedience in the face of fear. That's what courage really is. Listen to me today. You don't have to have all the answers. You just got to trust the one who does have all the answers. And even when you're scared of the outcomes that may be ahead, just keep in mind and remember that God's presence is the source of your strength. Moses is obedient to the call of God. We know the story. He goes through several encounters with Pharaoh. We read about the plagues, and Pharaoh lets the Israelites go. But Pharaoh, you know the story, changes his mind, begins to pursue the Hebrew people. And Moses' courage is tested now when he faces Pharaoh's resistance and the doubts as well of the Israelites. You brought us out here to die. With the Egyptian army closing in and the Red Sea in front of them, the Israelites panicked, crying out in fear. But Moses responded with a remarkable faith and boldness, and he said to them, Do not be afraid. Stand firm. You will see the deliverance of the Lord that he's going to bring to you today. Which reminds me of Psalm 46:10, where God says, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Again, let me say that Moses' courage was not based on his own strength, but on his trust in God's power to save. Aren't you glad for the power of God in your life to save and bring? You see, the leadership of Moses demonstrates that sometimes standing firm in faith means choosing to trust God's deliverance before it's visible. Oh, I got to say that again. I said Moses' life and leadership demonstrates that sometimes standing firm in faith means choosing, you got to choose, to trust God and his deliverance before it's visible. Winston Churchill said, fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. Oh, leave that up there. Fear is a reaction. Courage is decision. And Christian like Moses, we are called to make the decision to stand firm. Say, stand firm with me. Stand firm. Say it again. Stand firm. Say it one more time. Stand firm even when fear surrounds us. I remember I told a little bit of my Lordly's journey last Sunday. Let me continue. I remember after a couple of years of ministry in Arcadia, our first full-time assignment. There in Arcadia, we were just 45 minutes from Lordly's family in Lehigh Acres, Fort Myers area, and about the same from my family. They were pastoring in Plant City. Great. Get in the car, 45 minutes there, 45 minutes the other way. Separate directions, one north, one south. Sort of north. Our next assignment, when the Lord was finished with us there, and I never recommend this personally. Never recommend this to to young ministers now that I'm a little older. I'm not old. I'm not old, just a little older. We resigned there. When I felt God would tell we were done, I felt in my heart, well, I resigned. Nowhere to go. You know, our last Sunday, I just knew that God had said, well, you're done. Our last Sunday, we gave a 30-day resignation, and you did that back in those days. Now it's 2 weeks. Well, they want you out quick now. Yeah. But anyway, 30-day kind of deal. And our last Sunday, they loved us, and they gave a love offering, held us over. But the very next Sunday, we had a what we call tryouts. Remember those days? You still sort of call them that, And we went to First Assembly of God in Franklin, North Carolina. They loved us. We felt at peace about it. They called us. Actually, we had another place that we were ministering at the next weekend that had called us. We went there, and but we knew when we left Franklin that that's where God wanted us. But we were just being sure. And when we went to the other place, they wanted us as well. But we just knew that no, that was not what God wanted. We went to Franklin, North Carolina. So our next assignment was there. The U-Haul is all packed. Our 1975 Plymouth Fury was hooked up, ready to go, and it was green. The guys, the race car guys, they go, Plymouth Fury, wow. We stood in the living room of my family in Plant City. We already said our goodbyes to Lordly's family. In the living room of my family in Plant City, all ready to go. And I remember in my heart and in my mind, as I stood there with my wife and 2-year-old and 6-month-old sons, Clint and Derek, all of my excitement suddenly left. And for a moment, I began to experience fear, began to experience doubt. As we gathered in the circle, my family has always done that, and we still do it to this day. We're all gathered in a circle for prayer, and suddenly the Holy Spirit, through our tears, filled the room. And that fear that we were experiencing suddenly was gone, and we began to feel renewed courage as we prayed for God's protection and God's favor. Lord, and I suddenly felt a fresh anointing to go forth in obedience and courage in spite of the unknown. We didn't know what. I mean, we'd never been out of Florida. That's where we always lived. Lorelei had family up in South Dakota and out in Texas. She was a world traveler. You know, as far as I thought, I'd never been. Vacation, we've been to vacation in the mountains, maybe, when I was a kid, but that was it. Suddenly we felt a fresh anointing through the fear, through the uncertainty. Go. And the very few years that we ministered there, those few years were some of the most productive years of our lives. Were there hardships? Yes. Were there disappointments? Yes. But Jesus said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And we experienced miracle. You've heard us testify of many miracles that took place while we were there. Miracle after miracle after miracle. So friend, listen to me. For you, it might mean standing firm in courage, holding on to God's truth in a culture that pressures us to compromise. It might mean leading your family, church, or community through seasons of uncertainty, trusting that God will make a way where there seems to be no way. I encourage you, be a Moses. Be a man or a woman of courage in spite of the fear of uncertainty. Faith requires action. Faith requires obedience. Courage requires obedience. The final chapter of Moses' life highlights the legacy of deliverance that he left for the people of God. Through his obedience and courage, the Israelites experienced freedom from slavery and entered into a covenant relationship with the Lord. You see, this wasn't just about Moses. It never is just about me, and never is just about me and Lorelei. It never is just about you, or just you and your family. It never is about just us. It never is. It wasn't just about Moses. It was about God working through him to bless an entire nation. And as we learned last week, faith impacts future generations, and so does courage. Here's what happened. Moses' faithfulness pointed the Israelites to God's power and God's presence, laying the foundation for their journey to the promised land. John Maxwell said, and I quote, "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way." A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, shows the way. And that's what we see in Moses' life. He lived it out. I said he lived it out, demonstrating that leadership rooted in courage has the power to transform lives. Please keep in mind that acts of courage, whether it's raising children to know God, that's acts of courage. Serving as a volunteer in the church or community, or going on the mission field at home or abroad, or simply standing firm for truth. It all takes courage. All of it has a ripple effect far beyond what you can imagine. Think of it this way. Your courage today could inspire someone to take their own leap of faith tomorrow. Oh, I like that. Your courage today, say today, now. God's calling us to be men and women of courage now. Our courage today could inspire someone to take their own leap of faith tomorrow. I'll be honest with you. Many of you know our family history. Many of you know that. I look back and I've heard testimony after testimony of the leaps of faith some of my precious ancestors made, family members made. And you have the very same in your family. Testimony after testimony. And I'll be honest with you, I remember whenever I am contemplating to step out in faith, I'm always remembering, it comes back to my mind, those that have already done it before me. So let me ask you, where is God calling you to be courageous? I know He is. I know He is. How will you leave a legacy of boldness? How will you leave a legacy of courage? How will you leave a legacy of faith and trust in God's unfailing presence? How can we live out this legacy of courage in our own lives? How can we stand firm in the face of opposition? And opposition will be there. So as I'm closing, let me share 3 things. First, here's what you got to do. You got to identify. It's the first thing you got to do. Identify the areas where God is calling you to step forward. You got to identify. In prayer, you can't do that. Nobody, listen to me. Your mama can't tell you. Your daddy can't tell you. Your granny can't tell you. I told you some of my personal stories. Let me tell you this. I remember. I felt the call of God on my life, all of my life. All of it. I can't remember when I haven't. I really can't. In my teenage years, of course, went a little stupid. As a lot of teenagers do that. Especially preachers' kids for some reason. But also during that period of time, I would have people question me. You just want to be a preacher because your daddy's a preacher. But I've always felt the call of God on my life. And always. I cannot tell you, I really can't tell you a moment at an altar when I heard God say, I want you to do this. Because I've always felt it. It's crazy. I've always felt it. I've always known. But during this little season in my life, because of people, some of the things that were said, I began to doubt. Well, am I just wanting to do this because that's what my daddy did and because that's what my family has done in the past? My great-grandfather, Z.W. Bullock, is on the wall here, the window. My great-grandfather. I never knew him, just heard all the testimonies. Went to Southeastern, and after my first year there, the first summer, went on the mission trip to Belize, Central America. And I'm crying out to God, God, am I just doing this because this is what... And suddenly I had an encounter with the Lord. An encounter with God. Where God said, put all that out of your mind. I've called you before you were born. Called you before you were born. I called you. That's why all of your life, that's what you have felt. That's why you've always had this desire to walk and to serve me. Listen to me. Listen to me, friend. The first thing you've got to do is identify. This is one of the things as a minister, I'll use this term, minister of experience now, that I will say to those who have less experience, older, younger. I will say to them, the very first thing you've got to do, you got to settle the call. You got to settle it. And once you settle it, you never look back. Never. You never question it. The first thing you got to do is you got to identify the areas where God is calling you to step forward. Now, it doesn't have to be full-time ministry that Lord and I are in, but it might be a difficult conversation that you need to have with someone. It might be a bold decision like full-time ministry or a new ministry opportunity. You got to trust that God's presence will go with you just as his presence went with Moses. He said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Never. Yes, I will take you into some unknown territory. Yes, you may have to leave family, and yes, you may have to go far from them, but I will always be with you. The second thing you've got to do, you've got to resolve to stand firm in your faith. That's where you settle, you identify, and then you resolve that you don't look back. You don't question anymore. You stand firm in your faith, even when fear or opposition arise. Draw strength from God's promises, remembering that he is your refuge and he is your strength in times of trouble. And then thirdly, you got to consider and think about the legacy that you are building. Think of those that you are influencing through your courage and your faith. Like Moses, your boldness, your courage can and will inspire others to trust in God and follow his leading. Those three things. Oh, I'm sure we could come up with many more, but especially those three. The Sunday after missions convention. Next Sunday, we're going to celebrate missions. The Sunday after, we're going to explore, thirdly, person of legacy. That will be David. A leader whose legacy is marked by a heart, this is where we're headed, a heart for God. David was described by God himself, a man after his own heart. A man after his own heart. A man after God's heart. Think of that. Can we actually get there? I think so. David did. And yeah, you know the life of David, the story of David. All of the junk in his life. All the sin, all the mistakes. Foolish mistakes. Looking out the palace window that should have been on the battlefield. A lot of mistakes, but yet still he's described as a man after God's own heart. If Abraham teaches us about faith, and if Moses shows us the power of courage, David will remind us of the importance, this is where we're headed, of seeking God's heart.